Beze Gray Indigenous Beze Gray Indigenous Makwan Dodam, Janong Dunjaba, Anishinaabe Oneidandao, Lenape Nijmendadokandao. So I always introduce myself in the language first. It's a community teaching of mine. Even if I've had a bio before, I've always told that I still have to introduce myself in the language. But it's a community teaching that really ties in anyone in the space that may speak Anishinaabemowin, or it also brings in like the ancestors. So if they hear the language, then they feel like they're also welcomed in the circle. So it's a community teaching that I like protocol I have to follow. And I am Beze Gray. I go by they, them, he, him. And I am two-spirit, trans non-binary. I joke that like I'm a mixed nation from down here, so I'm Anishinaabe, Oneida, and Lenape. I come from Amjadong. My clan is Bear Clan, and I hold the responsibilities of the Bear Clan. And yeah, I identify as a land and water defender, more so than any other words of like activist or sorry or types of things, just because it feels a little bit more indigenized. And um, yeah, I feel like my job and everything was kind of introduced with the bio, so I'll move on from that. But I come from Amjadang First Nation, which is the most southern point, southwest point of um, like Ontario, and it's right at the bend of where like Huron meets the St. Clair River. And my people have always been here, and we are very closely related to the nations that are down here. Like there's Chippewas at the Thames, Kettle and Stony Point, Walpole's just down the waterway. And our treaty territory actually spans all the way up to Goderich, Ontario, so past London, Ontario. Um, and it's signed all the way down to Windsor, Ontario. So we kind of have like the whole southern tip that we see as our responsibility that we're caretakers for. And we also are from the homelands of like Michigan. But through history, we were pushed out of Michigan because they actually didn't even want any Indigenous people to exist in Michigan at one point in time. And so we were forced out to the borders. And so part of my community was from and is from Michigan. And like my Lenape side also stretches down to like New York area, New Jersey. But yeah, so I have a really big span of homelands that I feel responsible to and care for. Um, and like my community is very like gorgeous. Like we're still very connected to culture and language and try to revitalize those things and keep that space for like everybody, youth, adults. And I always really like to start out like my presentations with talking about like the goodness and the strength and the like resilience of Amjadong before going into harder topics, especially feeling nowadays when there's a lot of news that feels like really, really heavy. And so I kind of want to start out the space and talking about some positivity with Amjadong, and that we are still very like resilient, and like remind people that in this presentation there will be some harder topics talked about, but then also remember afterwards to do some self-care things. Like it can be hard always hearing really hard things these days. I feel like there's a lot of intense news and violence. So just reminding you to take some time after to care for yourself. Um, okay. So uh, I exited out of my presentation. One second. Uh, are y'all still seeing it?
Yeah, we could
Yeah,
see
we
it.
can still
You can
see
see
it.
it? Okay, perfect. Okay. So Amjadong shares a fence line with Canada's Chemical Valley, and there's actually a deeper history here with specifically oil. And so in our home territories here, this is actually where oil was first discovered in Canada. And so I always like to put quotations around the word discovery because it's like when you say Columbus discovered America, like it's just people already knew about it. People knew about the oil that was in and around here, especially communities like mine. We didn't use it in the same practices of the heavy extraction and digging into the land and creating things like plastics from it. But like we knew of it and we used it in other traditional practices, but never were like doing this abrasive of like drilling down into the land for it. And that happened in oil. It's like the oil heritage kind of area in Enniskillen. They actually named a lot of property like areas around there after oil. So there's like Petrolia, Oil City. Um, there's a few others that have like really crazy names. But like the oil started like with very early on in history within my area. So like we heard stories of like their first drillings and hearing of like oil spills that happened in like the creek and water sources that we needed to be able to use, like Black Creek and Bear Creek. And so like it's like a very long history that my community has with specifically the petrochemical industry. But that was around in the like 1800s. And so the first refineries kind of started popping up in and around here, not specifically as close to my community, but they were popping up in towns like Petrolia and London, Ontario, and it was actually moved down into Sarnia once the logging industry had kind of settled down, and a lot of land had been cleared and had been um, like stolen from my community in ways of like we didn't have good ways of communication of like English and translating to Anishinaabemowin. And there's some stories we have of those like shady land deals that happened in order for a lot of like Sarnia and Point Edward and all these kind of areas to exist. And so like the story that I had heard was like that lightning had hit the facility in London, and so they moved it down here, their like operation. And they really created like this like metropolis of refineries. And so the first refinery we saw come down in here was in the I want to say like 1850s kind of thing. So they've been here for over 100 years. And that was one of the first, which was Imperial Oil, Esso, which you may know from local gas stations, the one with like the tiger. We also have Suncor is here, Shell. And like a few other, but basically they do a bunch of different byproducts. So oil back in that time, like when they first started in the early 1800s, they were basically only trying to get kerosene out of it for like oil lamps and different kinds of things like that. And then they found that they could actually boil it down and find different products from it. So we saw things like gas and oil, asphalt, petroleum for like cosmetics, salves, petroleum jelly, waxes, chemical products like the plastics. And this is like one of my old like archive things that I had found that like I thought did a really interesting job of breaking down from which area it gets its different byproducts of oil. Um, but everyone says it looks like something different. Some people think it looks like a lung. I think it looks like a tree. But I always found it really interesting that it broke down the things that were made in my backyard because when I was younger and I like grew up on the Spence line, like, and I went to daycare, right behind the band office, which is like a literally two-lane road across from it's Ineos now, but like a big refinery. And we um we grew up like being so close to these things that I just didn't know what they were. And I remember being like really young and being in like my science class, like in grade 5, and they were describing the way that clouds were made. And I argued with my teacher. I was like, no, that's not how clouds are made, not through water, not through this. I was like, they're made in my backyard because I was so used to seeing the smokestacks. And my teacher did not know what I was talking about. I think she thought I was a little crazy. And we argued for like a bit there because I just couldn't grasp onto what she was talking about, like how like clouds could be made naturally. And she couldn't grasp the thought of like what I had grown up with and what I had experienced. And so like what it looks like now, like these refineries, like this is kind of a picture that you can kind of see, but all the Greenland is Amjadong, and on both sides there's refineries. And so we make up 60%, or I mean, we make up 40% of Canada's petrochemical industry. But they put 60% of the highest emitting in the 5 kilometer radius of my community. So they put the highest emitters as close as they could to my community. And like these are things that like people like I think are like surprised to learn about because when we think of Canada, we think of something so like lush and green and eco. But that's not like the case of like where I've grown up and facing environmental racism, where they put it directly on the fence line of my community. And like growing up with these experiences, it was very different because I had to face different things with health and with community members. I had to face things with spills. So these refineries run 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It's actually, they've told us we're much safer when they're running versus when they're not. And they release like many different like thousands of chemicals, some of them being like more dangerous like benzene, toluene, and some of them being lower grade, but we've like seen these chemicals being released for like over 100 years. Like I said, the first refinery had gotten here like quite a while ago. um and the mixture like of these chemicals, we're just trying to start to advocate to do research on accumulation because that's something we've always been very worried about is these thousands of chemicals mixing in a day. Like I've worked with my elder Ada Lockridge, who did the Amjadong Bucket Brigade, like a very famous thing that had happened. And she remembers like doing baseline samples. So she was doing air monitoring of collecting air in a bag through actually like a dirt buster, like a little vacuum. But they were sending those bags out to California to get tested. And she remembers going to do these tests, and she had to do some blank tests, so ones that weren't like maybe as close to the refineries or just on a day that seemed uneventful. And she did one, and she got the highest amount of chemical count and like more severe like chemicals in the day that she was trying to just like get a blank test. And it was very like eye-opening for her and for a lot of community members to be like, yeah, like these things just run like all the time. Like they're always releasing something, they're always doing something. And they never shut down, like I said, not for like holidays, not for anything. And we're seeing issues with the rates of like we have standards, and there's industry standards and there's actually like health standards. So what Health Ontario will say that's like safe for you to be exposed to is way different than an industry standard, but Ontario wants to abide by industry standard rather than Ontario health standards. And they also are rated on a certain amount a day. So it's more geared towards the workers. And so something like benzene has been a really hot topic around Amjadong. because we have had like a really high exposure. We're actually still under a state of emergency because of benzene. And benzene is one of those chemicals that we learned that there's no safe level for you to be exposed to. And during our state of emergency, 2 years ago in April, we were exposed to like I think it's like 0.06% or something you're supposed to be exposed to. Like, don't quote me on that. I'm just trying to tell you how low the number is. But we were exposed to like 38 like millibytes per million. So that's like over 300 times the amount we were ever supposed to be exposed to, and that was in one night. And like I said, these standards were based on more of like workers. So like in 8 hours a day, the industry standard is based on um like what someone can be exposed to per day. But Amjadong people, like we live here all year round. So like we sometimes some of us work within the community and live within the community. So we're exposed for 24 hours a day rather than 8 hours a day. So we're seeing like a really big lack of what standards are and what standards and even getting to like know that knowledge has been really frustrating and hard because it feels like a lot of community members have to feel like we have to dive into this like science world of learning about chemicals and what's safe, what's not safe, as a daily life routine thing of like that we need to just know this for our own safety. And we've seen things happen within our community of like when I said like spills and releases happen, like we get exposed to something like of a higher amount. And we have faced things like we had a very high percentage of like miscarriage rate for women. We also had a study done where it was found that we had two girls for every one boy being born. So like feeling like a impact of population. And things like cancers are very high in my community. And we're also just like any other Indigenous community where we face things like residential school trauma and high suicide rates sometimes. So like to have this on top of everything else that we try and like work through feels like a lot sometimes. Like when you have to constantly be working for a better environment or like trying to advocate or educate and create like this kind of space for community members and create like a better future for 7 generations. Um, yeah, so we have faced like a lot of like intenseness within our um community of like trying to do advocation. There's still a lot more work for us to do. And this is kind of like what I do within the lab, but advocation has always been something that I've felt very like important. And I've also seen a lot of connections with other like communities that I've worked with and the importance of um like each other sharing our stories and feeling connected to community and to further communities that also face environmental racism, which was really nice when I was like really young. Like I started doing advocacy work when I was in grade technically 7, but I started really doing it when I was in grade 8. And I was really young to start talking about Amjadong and to start figuring out and wanting change. And I'm now 30, so it's been quite a few years that I had been doing like research and creating platforms and things and campaigns and organizing protests that have been like a very long time coming, but there's still like a lot of work to be done with Anamjadong and with other like communities environmentally. But this is kind of like where I started. It was like finding out within my own community, like I said, because growing up, like it felt like so unnatural sometimes, like where I was like, I think I noticed for the first time, um, like when I started leaving the community, like I grew up only till about grade 1 or 2 or something in the community. But when my brother started doing hockey and and we would travel to like other places to do his like hockey tournaments and stuff is when I really noticed that I was like, oh hey, like not everyone grows up next to a refinery, or like this town doesn't even have a refinery. And it was like really jarring, except for when I went to Detroit. I noticed like the bigger refineries there, and again, very close to houses, very situated. Like strategically in a way that it was affecting another community. And like that was when I first realized that I was like, oh, like this isn't normal for everybody. Like, but this is our reality kind of thing. And so that's kind of, and then also, I feel like an inconvenient truth, surprisingly, did something for me as being like a young child, and like seeing refineries and talking about climate was something that was really big for me, where like that was a big waking up moment for me, to be like, yeah, we should be talking about climate, because I'm like, we talk about all the time like individual, like I felt like that was a bigger movement when we were talking about inconvenient truth of like individual footprint, but I was like, what about these huge, massive like footprints that these refineries in my backyard are creating? And I'm like, I already see the impacts of like on a day to day of like how I see spills to water. And sometimes like that can be like really like jarring to experience. We've seen spills to air where sometimes it is completely like unsafe to be outside because the air is like not okay that day because I spilled. We've seen spills to ground. We've seen spills through pipelines. Like the infrastructure they have here is crazy because they have like the Blue Water Bridge, so there's a lot of trucks that come in and out of here. And there's a lot of like rail cars and pipelines, like I said, that stretch all through Canada and the United States. Um, and just like really like trying to feel like that there is an importance to be able to talk about these things was like really like felt like a drive like as a youth where uh like becoming more invested in like the cause of like environmentalism and climate became very, very important like for me to feel very focused on. um So this is like a picture of like Amjadong. This was done really cool because I like the contrast of like the regalia with the like refinery smokestacks. This is another one. This is Ada. This is the bucket brigade that I was talking about. That's her bucket, and she doesn't have her vacuum with her, but like just some simple technology that she started to use to start recording air samples was like groundbreaking. Like is always one of my heroes from the community, and she's one of the earliest people, same with Ron Plainba, to start talking about like environmentalism, and had taught me so much in my journey of like environmentalism. This was a famous picture that we worked on that showed how close to the houses these refineries are. So that's Amjadong over there, and then that's how like we're literally sharing a fence line with these refineries. This is another picture. This was during our Solidarity Day celebration. Just gonna get through these. So going early on within working with community and stuff, I wanted to figure out and work with other community members on how and what advocation looked like. And so one of the things that came through was actually a toxic tour. And this was something that was created through um, Ada and Ron, who I just mentioned. They had started working within the community, and they were doing what were called toxic tours at the time, like by themselves. Like they were just driving around their car, and they had done a lot of research and learned about the refineries and stuff in the area. and they were taking people like academics, just like journalists, anyone who would listen to like community members speak. And then like us being youth at the time, I think when I started working on Toxic Tours, I was still in high school. And it actually like came through the idea like as youth talking, and we were like what if a Toxic Tour was bigger and did more like interruption of these industries, because like if we do a bigger kind of like protest, we're blocking the roads and it's making them harder to do everyday work, just like sometimes how we face that like with sometimes like a spill will interrupt your like work day or like work week. And so we decided to like create this bigger march, and we actually had one year like up to 5,000 people come through, and I think we did a total of six toxic tours. And so this was one of the walking ones that we did. And people came from very, very far away. Like people became interested in them over the years. Like I think our first one was very, very small. But then within future years, they got really big and people from all over started to plan and to come to them. And this was very pre-COVID also that we started organizing these, because once COVID hit, we kind of took a break on them. And now we're working on other resources to make toxic tours accessible. So this is another walking one. Like we're blocking the streets. We're during this time, myself and my sister are on a microphone and we're telling you about some of the refineries that are in the area, some of the history that I shared, and giving you kind of like more context to the area that you're in. But we'd usually hold them in summers because they were easy for people to walk around in. But we did face one year where we had risks of people getting heat stroke because, again, climate change, it's just very warm. But we also combine these things with the Amjong water gathering. And this came through, we had been doing the toxic tours for some time of like the bigger ones. That an elder came to us and had talked about the importance of sharing um responsibility, like that um community members, Amjadong people aren't the only ones responsible for the Great Lakes. Like it's a broader community thing. It's everyone who lives, who enjoys, who wants to protect the Great Lakes. And so we created the Amjadong water gathering to coincide so that we had a weekend full of teachings of water history, our teachings of like why is water sacred? Like how do we protect water? What does it look like for Amjadong in protection of water? And we coincide that with the toxic tour. So it was really cool of like a bigger educational weekend where you got to choose which workshop you were going to, whether it was like water history of the area, or if it was like I think we even had like the Native Sexual Youth Health Network there, so you could also learn about your body in water. It was really fun. But we created like this crazy weekend gathering thing that was really, really, really important to community. And again, to show the importance of Amjanong's like teachings around protection, because I find sometimes when I talk about, especially when I get into the harder parts of talking about Amjadong's story, a lot of people have the question of like, why don't you move? And that's really intense of a question, because like we shouldn't be the ones moving. These refineries should just be doing better, or shouldn't be here. And so like this felt like it was such an important component to go with the toxic tours of to like really get our perspectives and to share like our teachings with everyone. Another like I am trying to show like a little bit of range of kind of things like of like advocation and stuff that has happened through um like my time or through but like different avenues and methods. So this one's more like of an artist perspective. So The Chemical Valley Project was a play that was created by my friend Kevin Matthew Wong. And he came on a toxic tour. He came on a few actually, and he was so like struck by the story of Amjadong that he wanted to create a visual play. And so in the like I don't know if it's your left or right, but in the corner picture where it has a picture of myself and my sister, he uses recordings of us, so we didn't have to be there every time, which was very nice because he brought the play a bunch of different places, and he's still like doing this play sometimes. But it had recordings of like the Toxic Tour and interviews and things with us. And he did it with his own like almost like magician perspective of like sharing the story of how he witnessed things, of how he heard things. And it was just like a way of creating advocation, but through his own way. And it taught people about Chemical Valley and of Amjadong, but in a very like safe and held and like beautiful way. And the way he even like closed off the play is really cool because it makes you really reflect like in on yourself on like learning about these things and like what can you do? What should you do? And so like this is like something that also came through advocation and work was that a play got made out of it. And it's really, really cool, but it's just another way of sharing like this kind of story, this kind of perspective. Um, Another thing, like I was always told was, why don't you do something legally? And like there has been a lot of stuff legally within Amjadong. We're still working on legal cases and stuff, but this was one that I felt very passionate about because it was for youth and climate change. And it was challenging Doug Ford's like Ontario government about his climate change standards and how his um his goal for 2030, and it still blows me away that like we started this case so long ago, like in 2018, 2019, and we felt so far away from that goal like 2030, and now like coming to this year I'm like wow, we're so close to 2030. And this case is one still going on, and two, Doug Ford in the last minute before we were supposed to go to court last time, uh, like got rid of that whole that standard that he created. And so that like is very like on par, I think, politically with what's happening and like not wanting to hold responsibility. But one thing I really appreciate about this case is that it's youth from all over Ontario. And we all have different perspectives. We all have different struggles with climate and in our own communities and our own advocation, but that we all come together and we're able to really fight for. And what I found was like my really big like not step in the case, but like my really big perspective on the case was that like Indigenous law, like our own Anishinaabe law, we like really focus on 7 generations. So what does that look like? That's looking at 7 generations back and what has happened, and 7 generations ahead and what is for them or what can we do to make sure that they still have these things like wild strawberries or species or all these kinds of things. And those things aren't as much respected or followed in Canadian law. So within this case, I felt like when we're talking about that's a generational thing that us young people are approaching law as these governments are not thinking far enough ahead for generations ahead. And that felt super important to have like a stance on. So doing the kind of legal avenue the way, even though it feels really hard and scary sometimes because being a two-spirit individual in a legal system is very intimidating. It's very scary and it's very hard. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But like again, I think the outcome and the stance of this case and the precedent that we have set already and that we're going to set in the future is very, very much important, kind of outweighs the feeling of scared sometimes. As well as through my work, I've co-helped created things like the pollution reporter app for my community, and we hope it to be helpful for other communities as well. But you can actually see the different refineries on the app. You can also see different uh, chemicals and like the risks that they have. So you can scroll down to like any one of them, like butylene, and it will show you the health impacts and which company releases it in the area. And it also has a way that you can report a spill through your phone. And that was something that was really big that we wanted for community because it's so inaccessible to do that on your own, but sometimes it just happens. Like it happened to me literally yesterday on Sunday where I was working outside and it just started to like really stink in the area I was at my grandma's house. And I was able to report a spill right through the app. So this kind of like breakdown and data work was like super important to be able to create for community. And then again, is another way of doing advocation, doing work for community and like met community needs and like continues to shift and change so that it can help community. And then things like other things that I've done through my work, data colonialism in Canada's Chemical Valley, where we break down the different impacts and things we've faced with trying to create uh, data, but more from like a grassroots like level. We've created stuff like ADA's data and pollution notification map. I won't go too much into those, but those are all on the Land and Refinery website that you can check out. But we create like resources that are all based from community want and needs, but makes things more accessible and more understanding for community members to be able to see and understand like what's going on. And it's also been really helpful for people outside the community to learn about the different things about Amjadong and like whether it's struggles that we have or things that we're fixing. Um, we've also done some publications. We started writing newspaper opinion articles of when big spills happen. We also did one like on mercury within the community. And like being able to write from a very like again, I'm not a journalist or anything, but this was a way that I found that we could get Amjadong's perspective and like we write as a group. Like there's a few of us in the lab of like younger people from Amjadong and we come up with like concepts and ideas and we just write about them so that people can get not just the facts of like a news article, but they actually get a more in-depth feeling from the community when things happen or things that we're going through. And then there's also like important things I feel like that are done with this was actually more based out of needing something of like self-care and feeling from doing all this like work because I feel like it's been really heavy and it's been a really long time and especially when I felt like I was in the youth category which was only like a year ago that I felt like such a big weight and responsibility to my own community for making change and um making something for like my community so that we can start to like combat and feel like our voices are heard with environmental racism. But like it was like a really hard thing for a really long time of just feeling like this held like a really big weight in my youthhood. But one thing that really connected me back and also gave me a lot of perspective on um, like climate change and our culture and language was culture and language was something that was like my self-care thing. Like getting on the land is like the most important thing that helps me get through like everything. And so I learned things through like quite a lot of people, but the one person I always like to really note is my cousin, but I called him like my uncle because he's more of the age of my uncle. But Bruce Ba, and I remember coming to him because he knew a lot about culture and a lot about skills, like land skills, that I really wanted to be able to engage in. And me being really nervous about that, not feeling seen or safe, like in those kinds of spaces as a they, them, or as a two-spirit person, I felt like it was important for me to like address that right away to him. And he told me that within Lenape communities, gender and sexuality like weren't a factor in what you did in the community. It was more based on what you're interested in, what you actually have drive to do. And I found that a lot for I found that a lot for my life as being a two-spirit youth is that um like whatever I wanted to do, I just had the audacity to do it. And so that teaching like really, really, really helped me. And it also made me feel really safe to be able to like explore culture and language and things with him because he was like, yeah, like if someone per se wanted to be out hunting, we would take them out hunting because they want to be out there. Versus if a man didn't want to engage with hunting at all, he was like, we wouldn't force them to be out there because they wouldn't be as like helpful or excited like to us to do that. And so he really explained it in like such like a really nice way, and he really gave me the confidence to be like, yeah, like I deserve to be in spaces and engage in culture and ceremony. And so I learned, or like do sugar bushing. These are some of the examples. Like I love to do drag in the sugar bush. So I do drag on my birthday in the sugar bush. And this was like me and my partner's company at the time was Sugar Daddies. But it was for maple syrup, and it was my favorite thing ever. I also really love gardening. My uncle gave me Lenape corn, squash, and beans. And they're very um, like they're a very rare seed. Like not a lot of people have seeds of like Lenape specific corn and beans. So I carry that as very like important to keep these seeds growing, especially within climate change. Like I've noticed through a lot of all of these practices that um, like our seeds, they're not used to this climate anymore. Like we have to continue to grow them out so that they get used to this climate and they start to adapt. Same with sugar bushing, like seeing the difference of teaching a knowledge of um, like you need it to be cold enough to sugar bush. If not, you can't really like do it. And that the difference of like historically, like when people used to tap maple trees, like they used to be able to tap it once and then it would continually drip for like weeks on end and then they would be done their season versus now we tap and it's like sometimes it's a day that you go and collect and sometimes it's not. And sometimes you have a few days spanning that you don't get to do it. And there was a year I think it was like 2023 or 2024 in Amjadong that we actually weren't even able to sugar bush at all in the community because it never reached cold enough. As well as I do hide tanning, and I like to create oh, I didn't include it. I like to create banners with my hide tanning, like political banners. Like we've done, me and my partner have done Free Palestine. We've done ones for our camp, Nijmene Hide Camp that we co-created. for Two-Spirit youth to be able to engage in hide tanning and have like a safe space to experience all these kinds of things. Because there's a lot of land skills that go into hide tanning itself. Like you need to know, or these are optional to know, but you should know how to like fire keep, structure build sometimes, woodworking, just kind of like bushcrafting things in order to like get your hide to go along sometimes. It's not just one skill meets all for it. And so it's felt like a really amazing space to create for others. And I feel like that's what I've done a lot in my youthhood is like making sure that there is spaces like the Toxic Tour. I remember I was the one really making sure we had gender neutral bathrooms and bathroom options and making sure it was like accessible and making sure that there's just always space for people within like whatever we're doing, if it's land-based or if it's like more activism. Um, but yeah, it's been like a lot, and I'm sure I will do a lot more with everything that I do of like culture, language, and environmental advocacy. But it is all very deeply rooted within my identity and feeling um, like that is really important to fight violence because I find that two-spirit people have always been very resilient and very resistant to those kinds of things. Like a lot in our history has always been we have been part of like the warriors within our communities. We have been part of the social care system within our communities. And that, like, I think that will continue and we'll continue to see two-spirit people do advocation through environmentalism or climate. Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.